Hello everyone, and welcome again to the second part of our little Camino, our Holy Week Camino as we call it. The idea is that we just take a little bit of time each day of this sacred week and allow its journey and its story to wash over us and into our own journey of the bits and pieces of each day of our life. Yesterday, beginning our journey, we took our cue from the book of Psalms, which told us that our soul, separated from God, is like a land that is parched, weary, waterless, and that we have then an eternal thirst that comes from the very depths of our being. And this thirst cries out to us. We're looking for water, but not just any water. We said we're looking for this water. No one who drinks the water that I shall give will ever be thirsty again. The water that I shall give will become a spring of water within, welling up to eternal life. This is the water that Jesus offers us, the living water. And we agreed, I think that, just wandering around in our spiritual life, hoping that somehow we might stumble across this water wasn't probably the best way of going about it. Much better to follow a definite pathway. And we said for that, let's bring in help. Let's bring in the help of those who know the way, those who have walked the journey. And that brings us to today. And here's how the person who we're asking to help us today has been described. It's said that he is one of the great masters of all time in the art of soulcraft. What he offers in this realm is parallel to what a Mozart offers in the area of music, a Michelangelo offers in the area of painting and sculpture, and what a Shakespeare offers in the area of literature. Some would say that he offers more than all three put together, and his name is St. John of the Cross. And to understand something of where John is coming from, and see if this makes any sense. At baptism ceremonies, I would often ask parents, how old is your baby? And they say, 9 weeks, 6 months, whatever. And then I'll ask them, especially if they're it's first time parents, I'd say, tell me this, how much do you know about life now that you didn't know 9 weeks or 6 months ago? And parents, independent of each other, will often say exactly the same thing in response. They'll say, well, two things. One is, we didn't know we could survive on so little sleep. And then they'll say, we didn't know we were capable of so much love. Now, I don't know if what those parents say so spontaneously relates to your experience, but to me it makes perfect sense. Not the sleep bit, the love bit. And that when we are touched by love, everything changes. And to know anything about St. John of the Cross, we have to know that such love is everything for him. And to get a sense of that, it's helpful to have some understanding of John's background. So here we go, an extraordinary life in 2 minutes. Okay. John was born in Spain in 1542. He was born into a poor family, one that had a lot of tragedy in its early years. Now, his father had been a very wealthy man, but he made the mistake, according to his siblings, of falling in love with a poor girl, and rather than renouncing her love, he renounced his own fortune. He was just disowned. So there's a clue straight away that John grew up in a family where he was immersed in the most wonderful sacrificial love, unconditional love. He was then sent to what was called the poor school in Medina. That's where they lived, and he proved to be a great student. When he was 14, he left and he worked in the local hospital, and there he worked with people with all infectious diseases and incurable diseases, and he stayed there for 6 or 7 years till he was 21. But if you think about it, these are the formation experiences of John. First in poverty, and then in suffering, but always immersed in love. And we will see how these all influenced John later in his life, especially when he came to speak about looking for fulfillment and happiness and beauty, not in the world essentially, but first in God. At 21, John joined the Carmelite order and he went to the university in Salamanca. It was in 1867, big moment for the whole world. I think he met Teresa of Avila. Now, Teresa's another one who knows the pathway to the living waters. And when they met, everything changed. Teresa asked John to help her reform the Carmelite order that both of them thought it had become a bit lax. And very soon the reforms started attracting many others to join with them. But it also started attracting massive opposition from the established Carmelite order. And this sort of came to a head just before Christmas in 1577. Because a group of these Carmelites broke into John's residence and they took him away by force to the order's main house in Toledo. And John was imprisoned there. His conditions were horrendous. I mean, his cell that was made for him, it was so small, he could either hardly lie down in it or stand up in it. It was unheated, it was unventilated, it was effectively unlit except for a small crevice in one wall. Leonard Cohen fans already are making a connection with, the crack that the light gets in where wisdom comes in. He was fed only with bread and water, occasionally maybe a scrap of fish. But anyway, each week he was routinely scourged, not by one person, but by any members of the order who happened to be there at the time. And then he was brought back to his cell in the darkness and cold or the stifling heat, whatever it was at the time. And physically, then, we see this. That in every way, John was left to live in outer darkness. Yet it was in this darkness that an inner light shone. An inner light in the most astonishing way, because to survive, John wrote poems on bits of paper that were smuggled into him. And these poems, these writings, they were not any, this too will get better, and a better day will come, and all kinds of things. No, this kind of writing came from the blackest of darkness of his experience of desolation, of feeling abandoned, not just by people, but by God. And yet, in the most moving testimony to the journey of a soul that would not give up in its search for the living water, what John wrote on those scraps of paper are today acknowledged as among the most beautiful poetic works ever written. Okay. Now, we're going to take a little drop in the ocean of a look at one of them. Well, first I should say John escaped from Toledo prison and he formed with Teresa the Descalced order of the Carmelites, and he died in 1591. He was 49. Now, as I said, in the time we have, all we can do is take a little drop in the ocean of what John wrote. Okay, but even a drop in the ocean from John is like probably a tsunami in our soul. A thimbleful, but I suspect that even a thimbleful from John, it will certainly be a signpost to our parched soul as we seek the way to the living water. Now, as you might already know, the directions that John will give us are not for the faint-hearted. Well, certainly not for the half-hearted. Okay, so with that in mind, let's blast on here. The thimbleful of John's wisdom we're going to look at comes from a poem that he wrote when he was in his prison in Toledo. It's a poem called The Spiritual Canticle, and John also wrote a commentary on the poem, which is very helpful. And the story of the poem is a story between two lovers, the bridegroom and the bride, and it is an analogy of the love between God and the soul. God being the bridegroom, our soul being the bride. And the spiritual canticle has 41 stanzas, 41 verses, but no panic, we're just going to look at one of them, the very first one. Okay, this is how John begins the story of love, this poem, the spiritual canticle. Where have you hidden, beloved, and left me moaning? You fled like the stag after wounding me. I went out calling you, but you were gone. What do you think John is saying to us there? This might help. You might know, probably most of us do, the movie called The Truman Show, right? And in The Truman Show, in this movie, as again you probably know, Truman has a very fleeting encounter with Sylvia, who is one of the extras in the movie. And they're not supposed to meet, but they know then they only have a short time together. So what they do is they run to the beach and they kiss, and then Sylvia is taken away, right? But it's too late. The heart has been touched, the soul has been awakened. Truman is smitten, and from then on, everything in his life has changed. His whole focus has changed, and his search begins. He pines after Sylvia continually. We see him remembering her image by taking cutouts from different magazines and trying to create her image. He never wants to forget her. He wants only to find her. And so it is with John. From the very beginning with John, we're drawn into the pangs and the anguish of wounded love. These wounds belong to the bride, to us, our wounded love. And why is there wounded love? Because the bride's heart is truly smitten by our lover, the bridegroom. She yearns for him. Her whole being aches for him. But now, after wooing her, he seems to be absent from her. And so, with desires and sighs pouring from her heart, she cries out to her beloved, "Where have you hidden?" For John, the bride is our soul. It is distraught at the seeming absence of its lover, crying out, "God, where are you? Why did you leave me so soon after filling me with your love?" Now, everybody, do you remember yesterday we spoke about the legend of the primal kiss? The story that the last thing God does before putting a soul into the body is to kiss the soul. And the soul then goes through life always dimly remembering that kiss of perfect love. And the soul then measures all lives and loves and kisses against that primal perfect kiss. And then the experience is that nothing will satisfy the soul until it is once again at one with the primal lover. And so it is here. This urgency, this panic-stricken desperation, this cry of the soul crying out to her beloved, "Where have you hidden?" This is it searching for its way home. Also, everybody, there's this. If you know the Old Testament, then perhaps you recognize the inspiration for this poem. It comes from the Song of Songs. It's a book hugely influential on John, hugely inspirational for him, because he saw this book, Song of Songs, as a mirror of his experience of soul searching. The Song of Songs book, like the poem, it's about courtship and it's about love. And again, it's an analogy between the love of God and ourselves, the bridegroom and the bride. And at one stage, the bride, looking for her beloved, cries out in the Song of Songs, "Tell me then, sweetheart, where will you lead your flock to graze? Where will you rest it at noon?" What do you think of the bride here? The soul here is asking. She's asking, where will you pasture, God? Or maybe more in our language, where will you be found, God? We know the answer, do we not? Because where does the Father pasture except in his only Son? For the Son is the glory of the Father. Jesus himself told us so. To have seen me is to have seen the Father. And it is the same then with the spiritual canticle, the poem of John of the Cross. When John of the Cross has the bride crying out, "Where have you hidden?" she is seeking her bridegroom. She is seeking Christ, the Son, where the Father pastures in infinite glory. What does the soul know about this journey, this search? It knows this, that if she can go to this place where the Father pastures in infinite glory, that is where her beloved has hidden. So this is the journey of the soul to the living water. I think we are getting signposting here, are we not, from John of the Cross? So, but like I said, everyone, this is not for the half-hearted. And but yet, even as we ponder this right now, we know that our soul too is crying out at this moment, "Where have you hidden, beloved?" So the good news, help is on its way. Another signpost. In looking for an answer, John of the Cross, he advises us to go to St. Augustine. Now you probably know St. Augustine's story. He spent his entire life searching for the truth that will eventually to be found in God. But he went all over the place. He went this way and that way and upside down and inside out. He tried weird stuff and weird religion. He tried it all. But eventually he found himself in his Christian story back to where he had started. And he wrote this in his confessions about this part of his journey. He said, "I tasted you, and I feel but hunger and thirst for you. You touched me, and I am set on fire to attain the peace which is yours. And see, you were within, and I was in the external world and sought you there. You were with me, but I was not with you." Do you see how this can help us? Can you see how this can help us when our soul now is crying out, "Where have you hidden, beloved?" Because St. Augustine, as we said, spent his whole lifetime searching, and having found, in a sense, this Holy Grail that he'd been searching for, he offers us this response: "You were within." The bridegroom, the Son of God, together with the Father and the Holy Spirit, is hidden within, in the innermost being of our soul. Now, another signposter comes along and throws his hat into the ring. St. Paul now joins in the conversation, and St. Paul reminds us of this. The temple of God cannot compromise with false gods. And that is what we are, the temple of the living God. Why is that important in our search? How does that in any way help us come to the living water that we're searching for? It helps us because for John of the Cross, this is the crux of the whole journey of the soul. False gods cannot be compromised with. Whatever and wherever they are in our life, in our journey, they act only as an obstacle, a blockage to the journey of our soul. They must be overcome. And John, of course, plots a pathway for us to overcome these obstacles, a pathway for our soul to come to the intimacy of our beloved. And of course, we're going to take a closer look now, but it is probably time for a spoiler alert again. This is absolutely not for the half-hearted, what he's going to say to us. So here we go. One of the pillars of John's spirituality is this word here, detachment. And to progress along the pathway to the living water, it's a deal breaker. We need to practice detachment, most of us, because unless we actually are a living saint, literally, then we have attached to ourselves already alternatives to God, somehow convincing ourselves that these will actually satisfy the aching thirst, the longing at the center of our soul. Why not? Somebody else who knows the signposting way? St. Thomas Aquinas, he tells us about these attachments, and St. Thomas Aquinas tells us that typically there are 4 attachments in our lives that we substitute for God. And St. Thomas Aquinas says these 4 are wealth, pleasure, power, and honor. Wealth, pleasure, power, and honor. Any takers? Anybody? Maybe it's just other people. Anyway, Thomas says, and John of the Cross also, that we mistake these as alternatives to the living water which alone will quench our spiritual thirst. And it can become like an addiction. When we try to satisfy our hunger for God with anything less than God, we will naturally be frustrated. And then in our frustration, what happens? We will convince ourselves that we need more of this finite good. And so we go after it, only to find ourselves again, as we knew we would, be dissatisfied. So an attachment then for John is a disordered relationship in our soul with God, whether it be a person, a thing, a feeling, or even a religious experience. We might say things, oh, if I only had that car, I'd be happy. If I only had that person living with me, I'd be happy. If I could only turn back time, I'd be happy. If I only had nice clothes, I'd be happy. I suspect none of this really is news to most of us. We recognize that rather than placing our relationship with God as the source of our true longing, at times we can become dependent on something else. Here's one way that St. John of the Cross describes this prison that we build for ourselves. He said, "The soul that is attached to anything, however much good there may be in it, will not arrive at the liberty of divine union. For whether it be a strong wire rope or a slender and delicate thread that holds the bird, it matters not if it really holds it fast. For until the cord be broken, the bird cannot fly." This is one of his most famous images, the bird that is prevented from flying. And it matters not a jot how it is prevented, whether it is with a small string or a large rope. The lesson from John is this: it doesn't matter how significant is the attachment in our lives, whether it's small or whether it's great. Any attachment will hinder the flight of our soul to God. And that is why John cautions us against game playing. For instance, here's a very popular game that we can be quite good at. We rationalize that some of our faults, they're not that serious really, and that fundamentally we are good people. But playing this game, it will not mean that we become bad persons. That doesn't happen. It means only that we will stay as we are, good and solid in our mediocrity. And as the cry of our soul and the aching thirst of our souls becomes more and more obvious to us, we will also, the result of that game is this: we will also carry with us the sadness of not becoming a saint. Now, as we come near, everyone, to the end part of this journey, our Camino today, it's good to put down a marker in the journey of our soul to the living water. And the marker is this: what are the roles involved? In other words, what is our role in the journey, and what, if we can define it, is the role of the divine majesty, the one we often refer to as God? John of the Cross, as you probably have recognized by now, leaves us under no illusion what the roles are. In the first place, he says, we should realize that if the person is seeking God, much more is her beloved seeking her. The initiative belongs to God, and if we come to understand this, it normally requires a fundamental revision in how we understand our roles. Here's a story that might help. The story is about a group of people, and they've got lost in the jungle, and the resources are running low. So one of them is sent off to, into the unknown to search for food or water or help or whatever. And to make any progress, he has to cut his way through the heavy undergrowth, trying to make a pathway somewhere. But then comes the noise of the helicopter, and rescue is approaching. People are looking for him, and this changes everything. Now the one thing that is needed is a clearing, some space. This is so that what is coming can come. And for John, our God is an approaching God. like the Father in the story of the prodigal son, like the Father, it is God who searches for us, even as we are trying to find our way home. And if we can come to understand that, then we will come to understand that our role in the journey of the soul is to create the clearing, to create the space for God in order that we can receive God. And that brings us finally today to the image, an image that John uses to help us do exactly that, to create space in our soul. It's to do with the nuns. After John escaped from his imprisonment in Toledo, he spent some time as a spiritual director to a convent of sisters at Bios near the city of Granada. And John would visit the convent weekly. And when he was leaving, he would present each of the sisters with a card. The card had written on it some of his spiritual thoughts. Can you imagine having those cards in your little collection? Anyway, but there was one card that John used to use frequently, and he'd hand it to the sisters. It contained the sketch of a mountain, like this. Now, the image and his commentary on it, called The Ascent of Mount Carmel, it's renowned, acknowledged and revered today as a masterpiece of the journey of the soul into God, the ascent of the soul into God. The task, as John outlines it, not surprisingly, is to get from the bottom of the mountain to the top. The bottom is where the soul is beginning to awaken to the adventure of exploration. I suppose the understanding that we've been talking about, it's beginning to be aware of the thirst, the aching thirst for living water. And from there the journey continues, John writes, along the way that leads, in his words, to the summit of the mount. He calls it the highest state of perfection, where we here call union of the soul with God. Now, this image that John put together was redrawn like this, and as you can see, John has on it two wide paths on the left and on the right. Now, although these paths, they look wide and inviting, maybe the easier way up the mountain path, in the end they're a cul-de-sac, a dead end. John calls them the roads of imperfection, and he describes one of these roads as neither the goods of the earth, and the other pathway he calls nor the goods of heaven. They will not lead us to the summit. But as we see, there is a third path, and this one goes directly to the summit, and on this central narrow path is written the word nada. In fact, as we can see, it is written the whole way up the path. Nada, 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 nothing, 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 nothing. We are called to surrender everything. But we know this. It's the story that Jesus told us about the rich young man. Do you remember he came to Jesus and said, Master, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said, you know, give it all away, then come follow me. This is the pathway where we are purged of everything, all attachments that we have. We're purged of the things that we substitute for God. We're purged of our spiritual games. We're purged of enslavement. The journey will be for each one of us personal, intimate, and usually not easy. In the language of John of the Cross, this is when we enter into the dark night of the soul. Why dark night? Because it leads us into the unknown. But in the surrender of love, we understand that there is somewhere to go. But we cannot go there. God must bring us there. And so, if our soul, if we are graced enough to find that sometimes our soul is in this stage of the journey, the need is, it understands, to surrender it all. It must hold on to nothing so it might be filled with everything. This is how St. John speaks it. All the soul's infirmities are brought to light. They are set before its eyes to be felt and heated. Now, with the light and heat of the divine fire, it sees and feels those weaknesses and miseries which previously resided within it, hidden and unfelt, just as the dampness of the log of wood was unknown until the fire being applied to it made it sweat and smoke and sputter. And this is what the flame does to the imperfect soul. John is great. He's got great images, doesn't he? Anyway, John speaks, this is the journey, but John speaks about those, well, what if we don't bother? That's enough, I got this far. Well, John speaks about those who refuse this journey. And he writes to the sisters at Bias, and he says this: they leave God just as they came. Their hands were already full, and they could not take what God was giving. However, as we can see, John speaks also of those who stay the course. And at the summit, there is an abundance of nothing, because it holds total presence. These are John's words. Only the honor and glory of God remains. Now, this brings us to the end now, everybody. As we said, a drop in the ocean, a thimbleful of what John of the Cross has given to us. It is surely water for our soul, living water, or at least the signpost to that living water. We asked John for advice, we asked him for help. I think if you agree, he is generous in what he offers us. He's reminding us that our soul, parched, waterless, separated from God, needs to make this journey, and it needs to allow itself to be drenched in the life and the love of a self-outpouring God. So thank you for your time today. We can meet again tomorrow if you like. We'll be meeting another guide. This guide sometimes is called the Saint of Decision Making. So you probably know that is St. Ignatius of Loyola. But for now, perhaps you would just like to take some time with the music. The music will go on for a while, and just reflect on the prayer of St. John that we're going to put up on the screen now. Maybe you'd like to pray it with the music, reflecting on John's signposting to us today, okay? So God bless everyone. Gurimin Mark of Golair, Be Savalsha, and we'll see you soon if you like, okay? So thank you everybody, and God bless.